Hello, and welcome to the unfortunate events of OG Mako.
Bitch, you guessed it.
Mako Maddox, aka OG Mako, was born on April 23rd in College Park, Georgia, where he would grow up and live in a low-income neighborhood and be surrounded by drugs and other illegal activities. When Mako was only around the age of 12, he would begin stealing stuff as a way to make money. He said he sold drugs once or twice, but it really wasn't his thing. He just preferred stealing stuff instead. When he was only 19, though, he would be facing 20 years for a charge that he hasn't explicitly said. However, it seems to be some form of violent crime, but he would get off of this charge, work out some form of plea, and not face the time. I don't know exactly what he got. He hasn't explicitly said, but he has said that because of this whole experience, he has become less of a hothead and doesn't get as angry. While in the middle of beating his case, he would join a hardcore band called Dr. Doctor, which he could never record any music for, unfortunately, due to it being too expensive to do so. They did do a few shows, however, and Mako would say that the energy was really crazy, and it's one of the reasons why he makes the rap that he makes today, with the loud and energetic music being a signature of Mako. However, Mako wouldn't stay in the band as he felt there was no real reason for him to be there if they couldn't record music, which is really what he wanted to do. So he'd go on to start rapping, and he would release his first project, Public Speaking, in 2012, which was a really good first project, especially with the low budget it had, although it didn't get much attention. On September 25th, 2014, OG Mako released his biggest song ever, You Guessed It. It currently has 72 million YouTube views. This success, though, would come with a lot of criticism, such as people saying he didn't deserve it and had little to no talent, despite them not looking at what he made previously, where he tried to make really good music and tried really hard and made his best. But You Guessed It just so happened to be the stupid song that blew him up. This wouldn't stunt Mako's growth at all, and he would end up signing to the record label QC, which at the time was a relatively small record label compared to what it is today. Now, to understand some of this, you need to understand QC's background. QC was made by Kevin Lee, aka Coach K. A few years after founding the company, he would get into a deal with 300 Music Group. At first, everything was going great, but later on, QC and 300 would get into fights daily. So now, with that, Mako would go on to release his first EP with QC, Live Life 2, on October 24th, 2014, which had some positive response, like his song Gang getting 800k views, but altogether the EP didn't outshine something like You Guessed It, obviously. But the EP really does show Mako's real raw talent that he has, and he isn't just a You Guessed It rapper. He would continue grinding, releasing his self-titled EP on November 28, 2014, where he would expand out his sound, keeping the aggressive sound but added more melody to give it that more dynamic feel. He then would also release his EP Breathe on December 17, 2014, which would do more of the same as his self-titled but have way more of a political message, with an image of the Black Lives Matter movement as the cover. Even though all was going great for Mako in late 2014/early 2015, OG Mako would be ready to release his newest album, Children of the Rage, but it was also around this time that QC and 300 would get into a fight, where QC wouldn't be able to sell their records. They could release them, but they weren't able to make money off of them on things such as iTunes. This apparently lasted for 18 months. What would finally end the feud is that when Mako helped QC get a deal with Motown Records, aka Capitol Records. Despite Mako being able to do this, it seemed QC also had some problems internally. It didn't let Mako release the album. This obviously hurt Mako, and a lot of the album was like his heart and soul. He put everything into the album, but he knew he had to keep grinding. He would go on to release 5 EPs in the time span of a year, which is quite impressive. He would continue grinding, making more music, until on July 28th, Mako would get into a horrible car accident that could have been fatal. He would end up losing his eyesight in his right eye and suffer from multiple skull fractures and a cracked vertebrae as well. He would also begin wearing an eye patch after the incident, but he wouldn't have to wear it for too long, as shortly after losing his eyesight, he would be able to get surgery and have full vision back. But this was a big hit for him still, going through this horrible experience. After a few months, it looked like Mako had finally fully recovered from the incident and be back on track with his music. This wouldn't be the case though. While on tour, Mako would end up at the Seattle hotel where he would end up getting a cut on his eye, and he gets kicked out of the hotel because the staff were on some racist shit. And since he was in Seattle, it was heavily raining, so he finds a friend named Mr. Nice Nice, and he goes over to his house the next day. However, he realizes his eye is heavily swollen to the size of a baseball. So he then goes to the hospital where they tell him it's no big deal, and they give him a medication that doesn't work, and it ends up that he's actually allergic to it, and he begins pleading with the hospital saying like, you guys don't understand, this is different. because they weren't giving him anything else besides that medication that he was legitimately allergic to. So then they finally give this man a bed and put him on an IV machine to give him pain meds. And in the middle of the night, they switch out his common morphine for fentanyl, which is 80 to 100 times stronger than morphine. So when he wakes up, he feels horrible because they changed out his morphine to fentanyl. And when he finds that out that they did this, he instantly discharges himself because he realizes at this point that these people are not helping him. They are just making things worse at this point. And due to the hospital not giving him the right treatments, the once way more simple rash is now spreading across his body. And 3 days later, OG Mako would try to scratch his scalp, where then it would begin peeling off entirely. This is when Mako would realize that he has something called necrotizing fasciitis. Typically, this disease enters through a cut on your body. In this instance, it would have been the cut on OG Mako's eye, where then the disease would have spread rapidly throughout his entire body. So when he got to the hospital and they began giving him meds, that might have slightly stopped the infection, but due to them not instantly performing surgery, this whole effort to do this was basically useless. Since it took 2 weeks to realize what was happening to him, it'll take years of treatment for this to be quote-unquote cured, if it is curable. For him, he is also filing a lawsuit against the hospital, which is still ongoing. Also during this time, him and his girl would break up due to her not being there all the time for him while he's fighting this disease. These events would make Mako fall into a battle with deep depression and become very insecure, which is very out of character for Mako, but with the help of a friend, Mako wouldn't feel insecure about the way his face looked anymore, and he would begin posting pictures of his face again. Although this was just a small step in Mako's battle with the disease. Battle with the disease wasn't his only battle. His battle with QC had still been ongoing, with constant arguments between Mako and the label. Mako would actually show up to a QC meeting on acid, showing his lack of respect and altogether hatred of the label, who he said sabotaged his career. So on March 4th, 2017, Mako would decide to leak half of the Children of the Rage album on SoundCloud. And altogether, the album was pretty unnoticed for an album that once supposedly was shown to other artists who said the album could win a Grammy. However, it is also very obvious around this time that Mako was out of the spotlight and was only really known for being the you guessed it rapper. It is also around this time that Mako would begin being very envious of others, one of those being his own label, which he had basically made relevant, allowing them to get rappers such as Lil Yachty and Migos, and his whole label would be driving Ferraris and living extravagant. Mako wouldn't be living the same life as them, however. He would be basically living off of a fast food salary compared to what they were getting. This made Mako a very hateful and depressed person, not one who a lot of people wanted to be around. After a few months of doing this though, he realized that this was getting him nowhere and only making him a worse person and making everybody else hate him and not want to be around him. Although he still clearly hated his record label, he just didn't want it to affect him the way it was, and he didn't want to be envious anymore. And after all that, Mako would just kind of go on to live his life and learn things. He is still signed to QC to this day for reasons that seem unclear, and Mako in 2021 officially released his album God of Rage, which has been his newest release since 2017, and his first ever studio album release. However, the 4-year time span that it took Mako to release this album is indefinite of his issues with QC. Not much since then has happened. Mako is still fighting his skin disease and doing interviews. I don't see him really releasing any new music though, really soon at least, until he either gets a new record deal or works something out with QC. However, with Migos having that lawsuit against QC, it is clear QC won't change, even though Migos has dropped those charges, by the way. Here's my personal thought / opinion of Mako. Mako was an upcoming star who didn't blow all of his money away like Lil Xan and didn't get caught up in some legal trouble. He just had a series of unfortunate events happen to him, and as an artist, his label mishandled him and his music, not allowing him to release an album right after he blew up, not allowing him to capitalize on all the clout he would have gotten from that, just kind of made him fizzle out and fall out of the spotlight. But what his music did for the genre is definitely still prominent today, even if Mako isn't getting everything that he deserves from it. Now, last but not least, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and thank you for making it to the end.